Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back, to an era where a common cold could be a death sentence and a visit from the doctor might just be the last thing you ever experienced. We're talking about the Middle Ages, a time of knights and castles, yes, but also a period of truly, and I mean truly, disturbing medical practices. Forget everything you know about modern medicine. This was a world where science was blended with superstition, where a barber might be your surgeon, and where the cure could often be far, far worse than the disease. You'll quickly realize that you'd probably rather take your chances with the plague than visit a medieval physician. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere cozy, maybe let me know your location and the local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up feeling off. A dull ache throbs behind your eyes. Your throat feels scratchy, and a strange lethargy weighs down your limbs. In our world, you'd reach for a pain reliever, maybe brew some tea, and likely be back to normal in a day or two. But this is the Middle Ages. Perhaps the year 1340, and even a minor ailment like this is enough to send a shiver of dread down your spine. Medical understanding, as we know it, is virtually non-existent. Instead, the prevailing theory that guides every physician, barber-surgeon, and village healer is the ancient Greek concept of the four humors. This isn't just a quaint historical curiosity, it's the fundamental belief system that dictates every action, every cure, and every agonizing procedure you might endure. So, what are these humors? Well, according to this theory, your body is composed of four primary fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile or choler, and black bile or melancholy. Each of these humors is associated with specific qualities: hot or cold, wet or dry, and linked to particular organs, seasons, and even temperaments. For instance, blood is considered hot and wet, associated with the heart and spring, and a cheerful disposition. Phlegm is cold and wet, linked to the brain and winter, and a calm, sluggish nature. Yellow bile is hot and dry, tied to the liver and summer, and an irritable temper. And finally, black bile is cold and dry, associated with the spleen and autumn, leading to a melancholic disposition. Now, here's the crucial part: health, in this medieval worldview, is achieved when these four humors are perfectly balanced within your body. When you feel unwell, it's not due to a virus or a bacterial infection, concepts entirely unknown at the time, but because one or more of your humors are out of whack. You have too much blood, or too little phlegm, or an excess of yellow bile. This imbalance, this dyspepsia, is the root cause of all your suffering. And every single medieval medical practice, no matter how bizarre or disturbing it seems to our modern minds, is aimed at restoring this delicate balance. So, with that scratchy throat and headache, what might a medieval physician conclude? They might decide you have an excess of blood. Or perhaps, given the lethargy, an overabundance of phlegm. They don't have thermometers, stethoscopes, or any diagnostic tools beyond their senses, and a deep, often flawed, understanding of astrological charts and bodily observations. They'll likely check your pulse, examine your urine. We'll get to that delightful practice later, and perhaps even look at the color of your tongue. But ultimately, their diagnosis will hinge on which humor they believe is running wild in your system. The terrifying implication of this theory is that the cure often involves deliberately manipulating these humors. If you have too much blood, the obvious solution, from their perspective, is to remove some. If you have too much phlegm, you need to expel it. And these aren't gentle suggestions, these are invasive, often painful, and frequently life-threatening procedures. The idea that your body could naturally heal itself, or that diseases were external invaders, was largely foreign. Instead, it was an internal battle, a constant struggle for equilibrium, managed by the aggressive intervention of the healer. Imagine the anxiety. Every sneeze, every cough, every ache is interpreted through this lens. You start to feel a cramp in your stomach, and your mind races. Is it too much yellow bile causing your liver to overheat? Or an excess of black bile making you melancholy and therefore susceptible to internal disturbances? The very language of illness is steeped in this humoral theory. To be sanguine from Latin sanguis, meaning blood implies cheerfulness, while to be phlegmatic implies calmness. To be choleric implies anger, and melancholy implies sadness, all stemming directly from the dominant humor. It's a pervasive worldview that shapes not just medicine, but personality traits and even societal understanding of human behavior. Historians still debate the precise origins and influences of humoral theory across different cultures, but its dominance in medieval Europe is undeniable. This fundamental misunderstanding of human physiology meant that even the most well-intentioned treatments often did more harm than good. A patient already weakened by illness might be further debilitated by aggressive bloodletting. Someone suffering from dehydration might be given a powerful purgative. The body, already struggling, was pushed to its limits by interventions designed to rebalance it, often with devastating consequences. You, lying there in your straw mattress, shivering with a fever, would be at the mercy of a system that believed the problem was inside you, a chemical imbalance, rather than an external threat. And the solutions for that internal imbalance were anything but pleasant. This belief system was taught in universities, passed down from generation to generation of physicians, and even influenced folk medicine. It was the absolute, unquestioned truth of the human body for centuries. So, as you prepare to meet your medieval doctor, remember this. They aren't trying to fight germs or mend broken cells. They are trying to drain, purge, and balance the fluids within you, often with terrifyingly crude methods. All in the name of a theory that would, by modern standards, sound utterly insane. And your survival would depend less on their skill and more on your body's sheer dumb luck. You're still feeling under the weather, that medieval headache persisting, perhaps even worsening. Your physician, having diligently observed your urine more on that particular delight later, and consulted his charts, has made his diagnosis you have an excess of blood. Or, to put it in medieval terms, your sanguine humor is too dominant, throwing your entire system out of whack. And the most common, indeed almost universal, remedy for nearly every ailment in the Middle Ages: bloodletting. This wasn't some rare, desperate measure. This was the go-to solution. A medical practice so pervasive it was often performed not just by physicians, but by barber surgeons and even lay practitioners. The belief was simple: if an imbalance of humors was making you sick, and blood was one of those humors, then removing some blood would naturally restore balance. It was applied for everything: fevers, headaches, inflammation, infections, and even mental illness. Feeling sluggish. Too much blood, feeling irritable. Too much blood. Broken leg. Yep, probably still too much blood. It was the medieval equivalent of, have you tried turning it off and on again, but with far more severe consequences. So, you find yourself lying down, or perhaps sitting upright, in a dimly lit room. The air is probably cold, perhaps damp. Your doctor approaches, not with a gentle touch, but with a collection of surprisingly sharp, yet often unsterilized, instruments. He might present you with a choice of where to be bled, often correlating to your ailment. If it's a headache, perhaps the veins in your neck or temples. If it's a stomach issue, maybe a vein in your arm or leg. The specific veins chosen were often believed to have direct connections to different parts of the body, based on ancient anatomical charts that were more artistic than accurate. There were several methods for this charming procedure. The most common was venesection, where a vein, usually in your arm, was simply cut open. Imagine the scene: your arm, perhaps slightly warmed to make the veins more prominent, is tied off tightly above the elbow with a linen bandage. This makes the vein bulge, a blue line against your pale skin. Then, with a quick, decisive motion, the surgeon makes an incision with a sharp, pointed blade called a lancet. You feel a sharp prick. Then, a sickening warmth as blood immediately begins to flow. It's collected in a basin, often a brass or pewter bowl. The amount carefully measured by eye or sometimes by counting the number of cups removed. The goal was usually to take quite a lot, often a pint or more, sometimes even several pints over a period of days. To put that in perspective, a modern blood donation is about a pint. You're already weak from your illness, and now you're about to become significantly weaker. Another method, often used for more localized issues or when veins were harder to access, was scarification, sometimes followed by cupping. For scarification, the practitioner would make multiple small, parallel incisions on your skin, often with a multi-bladed instrument. Think of a tiny rake with sharp teeth. These superficial cuts would cause blood to well up on the surface. Then, a heated cup, typically made of glass or horn, would be applied over the cuts. The heat created a vacuum, drawing the blood more vigorously to the surface, creating a grotesque hickey-like bruise as it extracted the bad blood. This could be done anywhere on the body, depending on where the imbalance was perceived. It looked and felt exactly as unpleasant as it sounds. And then there were leeches. Oh, the leeches. These slimy, segmented worms were particularly popular for bloodletting, especially for delicate areas or when a precise, slow bleed was desired. The practitioner would simply place a few of these wriggling creatures onto your skin, usually on an area where a vein was close to the surface. The leech, with its multiple tiny teeth, would latch on and begin to engorge itself with your blood. You might feel a slight prick, then a numb sensation as the leech injects a natural anesthetic. They would suck until they were plump and round, often falling off on their own, leaving behind a small bleeding wound that could continue to ooze for hours due to the anticoagulant properties of their saliva. The thought of these creatures crawling on your skin, steadily draining your life force, is enough to make anyone squirm. The detail that often escapes modern audiences is just how many leeches could be applied at once. It wasn't uncommon for a dozen or more to be used. The immediate effects of bloodletting were often dramatic. You might feel lightheaded, dizzy, weak. Your vision could blur, and you might even faint. From the medieval perspective, this was a sign that the procedure was working, that the excess had been successfully removed. But from a modern perspective, this was a clear sign of acute blood loss, further stressing an already compromised system. Imagine recovering from a fever, only to be made dangerously anemic by your cure. It's a miracle anyone survived. The complications were endless. Without any understanding of sterilization, every cut, every leech bite, every incision was an open invitation for infection. The instruments were rarely cleaned between patients, and the air itself was filled with bacteria. A common historical fact is that many patients who underwent bloodletting would later die not from their original ailment, but from the rampant infections that set in at the site of the bleed. Sepsis, gangrene, local abscesses, all were common outcomes. You might escape your fever, only to find yourself with a raging infection in your arm, the limb swelling, turning red, and eventually black, festering with pus, bringing on another far deadlier fever. Historians still debate the extent to which bloodletting actually hastened death in medieval patients versus simply doing no good. But the consensus is clear: it almost certainly did more harm than good, especially when performed excessively. The belief in its efficacy was so strong that even when patients clearly deteriorated, the physician would often conclude that more bloodletting was needed, doubling down on a fatal strategy. It was a vicious cycle of a flawed theory leading to harmful practices, which in turn reinforced the flawed theory because any survivors were seen as proof of its success. It truly was a medical lottery, and you, the patient, were holding a losing ticket. You've somehow survived the initial bloodletting, feeling perhaps a bit weaker, but thankfully not yet succumbing to infection or immediate collapse. Your medieval physician, still convinced that your internal humors are wildly out of balance, now turns to another cornerstone of their medical practice, purging and purgatives. If the problem is an excess of something inside you, then the logical solution, from their perspective, is to force it out, often with extreme prejudice. This is where your digestive system becomes the battleground, and the cure might leave you wishing for the simpler days of a headache. Imagine the doctor's grim satisfaction as he declares, "We must cleanse the humors." This isn't about gentle detoxification. It's about a violent expulsion, often from both ends. The belief was that illness was caused by corrupt humors, or even putrefying matter, trapped within your body. To restore health, these noxious substances had to be vigorously removed. So, what exactly are these purgatives? They were a terrifying array of substances, often derived from plants, but frequently mixed with other, less savory ingredients. You might be given a concoction of hellebore, a highly toxic plant known for its powerful emetic and purgative properties, or perhaps scammony, a strong resinous laxative that would induce violent bowel movements. Aloe, senna, and even mercury compounds were also in the medieval apothecary's toolkit, all designed to induce extreme vomiting, diarrhea, or both. These weren't precise pharmaceutical compounds. They were crude, potent mixtures, often administered in large, unregulated doses. You would be given this vile brew, perhaps mixed with honey to make it marginally more palatable, though the taste would likely be secondary to the effects. Within a short time, your stomach would begin to churn violently. You would feel a wave of nausea, a sudden, overwhelming urge to vomit. And then it would begin projectile vomiting, relentless and agonizing, emptying your stomach and beyond. This wasn't just a simple throwing up. It was your body trying to expel everything, forcefully and repeatedly. You'd be hunched over a basin, or perhaps simply lying in your own mess, your throat raw, your abdominal muscles cramping with violent spasms. But the ordeal wouldn't stop there. The purgative would work its way through your system, leading to bouts of severe, watery diarrhea. Your body, already weakened by your initial illness and potentially by bloodletting, would now be subjected to extreme fluid loss. You'd be constantly rushing to the chamber pot. Or worse, simply losing control, leaving you drenched in your own bodily fluids. The smell would be pervasive, the discomfort constant. Imagine the exhaustion, the muscle weakness, the relentless cramping in your gut. This was meant to cleanse you, to purify your system. But it often left patients severely dehydrated, electrolyte imbalanced, and utterly depleted of energy. The medieval understanding of the digestive system was, to put it mildly, rudimentary. They didn't understand the vital role of fluid balance or the dangers of dehydration. From their perspective, the more violently you purged, the more effectively the bad humors were being expelled. So, a patient suffering from severe vomiting and diarrhea was often seen as a sign of successful treatment, even as the patient rapidly deteriorated. This common historical fact of aggressive purging contributing to mortality rates is a chilling reminder of the limits of their knowledge. Complications from these harsh purgatives were common. The corrosive nature of some substances could damage your esophagus and stomach lining. The extreme dehydration could lead to kidney failure, shock, and a slow, agonizing death. Your bowels could become inflamed, leading to chronic pain and dysfunction. And of course, the constant exposure to bodily fluids in an unhygienic environment meant a high risk of secondary infections, compounding your misery. You might be suffering from a fever, and now, thanks to your cure, you're also battling severe gastrointestinal distress and creeping infection. It was a lose-lose situation. This obsession with purging extended beyond simply ingesting concoctions. Medieval doctors also employed enemas known as glisters to forcibly cleanse the lower bowel. Imagine, after all the oral purgatives, being subjected to a forceful injection of various liquids, often warm water mixed with herbs, or even more potent laxatives, directly into your rectum. It was an invasive and deeply uncomfortable procedure, designed to induce even more violent expulsions. The humiliation, combined with the physical agony, would be immense. There was even a belief that certain foods could cause an excess of particular humors, and therefore a restricted diet was often part of the purgative regimen. You might be forced to consume only bland, easily digestible foods, or perhaps even fast for extended periods, further weakening your already vulnerable body. The irony is that the very nutrition needed for recovery was often withheld or replaced with substances designed to violently expel everything. Historians often debate the psychological impact of these aggressive and humiliating treatments. How did patients truly feel about such invasive procedures? While medieval society might have been more accustomed to physical hardship, the sheer discomfort and degradation of these treatments, combined with the uncertainty of their outcome, must have been terrifying. You'd be left feeling completely violated, exhausted, and often sicker than when you started. It truly made you wonder if death was the gentler option. You'd likely be so weak and disoriented, perhaps just grateful for any cessation of the painful process, that you wouldn't even consider questioning the doctor's methods. But as you lay there, drained and trembling, you might just quietly hope that the next remedy wouldn't involve quite so much expulsion. You've somehow survived the internal assaults of bloodletting and violent purges, your body aching but still clinging to life. Perhaps you're even starting to feel a flicker of hope. But then, your medieval physician, after much deliberation, looks at you with a grave expression and declares that your ailment, particularly if it involves the head, requires a more drastic, more terrifying intervention: trepanation. This is the chilling practice of drilling holes directly into your skull, a procedure that sounds like something out of a horror film, and in the Middle Ages, often was. Imagine the scenario. You've been suffering from persistent headaches, perhaps even seizures, or what might be perceived as madness. In the medieval mind, these symptoms weren't linked to complex neurological conditions or internal pressure. Instead, they were often attributed to evil spirits trapped within your head, or perhaps to an excess of bad humors creating pressure on the brain. The solution, therefore, was simple: create an opening to let them out. This was trepanation, a procedure so ancient it predates even the Middle Ages, with evidence found in Neolithic skulls, showing just how deeply ingrained this terrifying idea was in human history. You'd be brought to a dimly lit room, perhaps a corner of a smoky hovel, or a chamber in a monastery, depending on your social standing. There's no sophisticated surgical table, just a sturdy wooden bench or a straw-filled pallet. Your surgeon, likely a barber surgeon, as true physicians rarely performed manual operations, would approach with his tools. These aren't delicate instruments of modern neurosurgery. We're talking about a terrifying array of drills, saws, and chisels, often crude, unsterilized, and certainly not designed for precision. Imagine a hand-cranked drill, perhaps with a pointed bit, or a circular saw-like instrument designed to cut a perfect disc of bone. The very sight of these tools would be enough to send shivers down your spine. There's no anesthesia, of course. As with bloodletting, you might be offered some opium or alcohol, but these would only dull the edges of the excruciating pain, not eliminate it. You'd be held down, probably by several strong attendants, their grip firm against your struggling body. The chilling cold of the metal tool as it touches your scalp would be the first sensation, followed by the agonizing pressure as the surgeon begins to bore into your skull. You would hear the sickening, scraping sound of bone, a grinding, grating noise that resonates deep within your head, making your teeth ache. The smell of burning bone and flesh would fill your nostrils, a truly horrifying stench. The pain would be immediate and excruciating, a white-hot agony that would make you scream. Even if your mouth was gagged with a cloth or leather strap, you would feel every agonizing turn of the drill, every crunch as the bone gave way. The surgeon would be careful not to penetrate too deeply, to avoid damaging the brain. But precision was a rare commodity. Imagine the terror of being fully conscious, fully aware, as a hole is meticulously drilled into your living skull. A fascinating historical detail, often debated by scholars, is how medieval surgeons managed to avoid penetrating the dura mater, the membrane covering the brain, so often, leading some to believe there was a rudimentary skill level involved, or simply that many patients who survived were the lucky ones where the hole was superficial. If the operation went well, meaning you didn't die from the immediate trauma, the bone disc would be removed, revealing the pulsating membrane beneath. The belief was that the offending humors or spirits would now have a way to escape. Relieving the pressure, the wound would then be dressed, often with rudimentary bandages, herbs, or even wax, with no understanding of aseptic technique. The open wound, now a direct portal to your brain, was an open invitation for infection. And this is where the true terror of trepanation lies. Without sterilization, bacteria would swarm into the exposed brain tissue. Within days, you would likely develop a raging fever, your body racked with chills. The area around the trepanation site would swell, becoming hot, red, and exquisitely painful. You might become increasingly confused, disoriented, and eventually delirious as the infection spread, leading to meningitis or brain abscesses. The headache, the very symptom that led you to this horrific procedure, would return with a vengeance. But this time, far more intense and coupled with terrifying neurological symptoms: seizures, paralysis, loss of consciousness. Your death, if it came from a trepanation-induced infection, would be agonizing and drawn out, marked by excruciating pain, high fever, convulsions, and eventually, a descent into coma and death. It wouldn't be a quick, clean end. It would be a slow, torturous decay, a living nightmare as your brain, the seat of your consciousness, slowly succumbed to microbial invaders. This tragically common outcome is a chilling reminder of the dangers of invasive surgery in an era without germ theory. Even if you miraculously survived the immediate infection, the hole in your skull remained. You might wear a metal plate or a leather cap to protect the exposed area, but you would be forever marked, a living testament to a barbaric medical practice. And the initial ailment, the headaches, the seizures, might not even have been cured, leaving you to suffer the original malady in addition to the terrifying, permanent scar on your head. Historians still debate the true success rates of medieval trepanation. While some skeletal remains show signs of bone regrowth around trepanation sites, indicating survival, it's impossible to know how many more died and whose remains were never found or identified. The limited evidence suggests that for some specific conditions, like relieving pressure from head trauma or hematomas, it might have, by sheer chance, offered some temporary relief. But for the majority of ailments it was applied to, it was a deadly gamble. You, as the medieval patient, would have had no say in the matter. Utterly at the mercy of a belief system that saw a hole in your head as a logical, even necessary, path to healing. It truly makes you appreciate the marvels of modern neurosurgery, doesn't it? You've miraculously survived the invasive horrors of bloodletting, aggressive purges, and even the chilling prospect of a hole in your skull. Your body, though battered, still draws breath. But sometimes, despite the best or worst efforts of medieval medicine, the ailment or injury is simply too severe, too devastating for any amount of purging or balancing of humors. This is when your medieval physician, with a grim look, will turn to the most brutal, most terrifying solution in their limited arsenal: amputation. This isn't just a last resort. It's often a death sentence delivered with a saw, performed without any of the comforts or understanding of modern surgery. Imagine the scenario: you've suffered a horrific injury. Perhaps your leg has been crushed by a falling stone during a castle siege, or your arm has been mangled by a runaway cart in a crowded market. The limb is clearly beyond saving, gangrenous, shattered. or so severely lacerated that infection is already taking hold, turning the flesh a putrid black. The pain is excruciating, constant, and you're likely already weakened by fever and the general lack of hygiene. Your surgeon, almost certainly a barber surgeon, not a university-trained physician, surveys the damage. He knows, or at least believes, that to save your life, the limb must come off. You'd be brought to a crude operating area, perhaps just a cleared space in a dusty room or a corner of a smoky kitchen. There's no sterile environment, no gleaming stainless steel. Your surgical table is likely a sturdy wooden bench or a rough plank. The light is dim, flickering from a few candles or a meager window. The instruments laid out before you would make a modern person recoil rusty, often dull. Saws of various sizes, large, unwieldy knives, hooks, and perhaps a cauterizing iron, already heating in a nearby brazier. These tools have likely been used on countless others, wiped clean with a dirty rag, but never truly sterilized. And the anesthesia? There isn't any, not as we understand it. You might be given a strong draft of opium, if available, or a generous quantity of alcohol, usually potent ale or wine. These might dull the edges of your awareness, making you drowsy, but they won't render you unconscious or numb to the agonizing pain. More likely, you'll be given a leather strap or a stick to bite down on, and several strong men, shipmates, family members, or burly assistants will hold you down. Their grip will be firm, unyielding. As you writhe and scream, the procedure begins. The surgeon makes an incision with a sharp knife, cutting through skin, muscle, and tissue. You feel the searing pain, a white-hot agony that erupts through your body. The blood gushes, a shocking, warm torrent. The smell of fresh blood, mixed with sweat and fear, fills the air. Then comes the sound. The truly horrifying sound, the rasping, grinding noise of the saw as it bites into your bone. It's not a quick cut. It's a slow, deliberate process. The bone resisting the dull blade. You can feel the vibrations through your entire skeleton. Hear the sickening crunch as the saw works its way through. Your screams tear through the room, raw and primal, until your voice is hoarse or you lose consciousness from the shock and pain. If you somehow manage to stay awake, or regain consciousness, you'd witness the limb being severed, perhaps dropped into a bucket with a sickening thud. The open stump, now a bleeding, exposed wound, is then the next challenge. To stop the profuse bleeding, the surgeon might try to tie off the major arteries, but often, the most common method was cauterization. Imagine a red-hot iron, glowing from the brazier, being pressed directly onto your severed flesh. The smell of burning tissue is horrific, and the pain, though perhaps momentarily numbing the nerve endings, is indescribable. The sizzle, the smoke, the agonizing heat, it's a barbaric way to seal a wound. Alternatively, the wound might be dressed with crude bandages, herbs, or even various types of salves made from animal fat or other dubious ingredients, often designed to draw out bad humors. But the amputation itself, brutal as it is often not what truly kills you. The real silent killer, as we've discussed before, is infection. Every step of the process is an open invitation for bacteria. The unwashed hands of the surgeon and his assistants, the unsterilized tools, the filthy operating environment, the bandages made from unboiled rags all contribute to a microbial invasion. Within days, the stump would swell, becoming hot, red, and excruciatingly painful. Pus, thick and foul-smelling, would begin to seep from the wound. You'd develop a high fever, uncontrollable chills, and often delirium. This is sepsis setting in. Your body's immune system overwhelmed by the rampant infection. The pain would be constant, a throbbing agony that never truly subsides. You might suffer from gangrene, the flesh around the stump turning black and putrid, spreading further up your limb. The smell would be sickening, pervasive. You'd drift in and out of consciousness, your dreams filled with feverish nightmares. Your body, already weakened by the initial trauma and the surgery, would fight a losing battle against the unseen invaders. A common historical fact is that the mortality rate for amputations in the Middle Ages was incredibly high, often exceeding 50% to 70%, with most deaths occurring from infection days or weeks after the surgery. Even if you miraculously survived the immediate infection, the challenges wouldn't end. There would be no prosthetics as we know them, just perhaps a crude wooden peg leg or a simple hook. Your life would be forever changed, marked by profound disability, constant phantom pains, and the ever-present memory of the horrific ordeal. The lack of proper wound care and understanding of long-term healing meant chronic pain. Slow healing wounds and recurring infections were a grim reality for many who endured. Historians still debate the specific techniques used for various types of amputations in medieval texts, highlighting how much of this brutal practice was learned through grim trial and error. So, while medieval medicine sometimes offered the hope of saving a life through such drastic measures, for you, the patient, it was a terrifying gamble. You would face unimaginable pain, a high likelihood of a slow, agonizing death by infection, and a lifetime of disability if you somehow survived. Your last conscious thoughts might be of the burning iron, the grinding saw, and the overwhelming realization that the cure was often just a slower, more deliberate path to the grave. You've somehow, miraculously, endured the agony of an amputation, the very thought of which makes a modern person wince. You're still alive, a testament to sheer resilience or incredible luck, perhaps both. But who exactly is performing these terrifying, life-or-death procedures? It's rarely the dignified, university-trained physician you might imagine. Instead, in the Middle Ages, your doctor, for any hands-on medical intervention, from a tooth extraction to a limb removal, would likely be a barber surgeon. This is where the lines between a haircut, a shave, and a gruesome operation blur in a truly disturbing way. Imagine this: you're suffering from a nasty abscess, a deeply infected wound that's swollen and throbbing with pus, or perhaps a tooth has gone bad, causing excruciating pain. In our time, you'd visit a dentist or a surgeon in a sterile clinic. In the Middle Ages, you'd likely head to the local barber shop. Yes, the same place where you'd get your hair trimmed or your beard shaved. The barber's pole, with its distinctive red and white stripes, isn't just a quaint symbol, it's a direct historical callback to the practice of bloodletting. The red symbolizing blood and the white representing bandages. This common historical fact serves as a stark reminder of the intertwined nature of these professions. The barber-surgeon's shop would be a far cry from a sterile operating room. It might be a small, cluttered space, probably smelling of sweat, stale ale, and something vaguely medicinal, perhaps a pungent herb being boiled. Tools for shaving and hair cutting would sit alongside an array of gruesome medical instruments: razors, tooth-pulling pliers, lancets for bloodletting, remember those? And perhaps even small saws and knives for more serious procedures. All of them would be well used, wiped clean on a dirty cloth, but never truly sterilized. The very thought of a razor that just shaved someone's beard now being used to open a wound is enough to make your stomach churn. So, why barbers? In an era before formal medical licensing and specialized training as we know it, skills were often passed down through apprenticeships. Barbers were already adept with sharp instruments, razors, scissors, and possessed steady hands. They were familiar with bleeding, as shaving often involved minor nicks. Over time, their practical skills extended to minor surgeries, wound dressing, tooth extractions, and of course, the ubiquitous bloodletting. University-trained physicians, on the other hand, considered manual labor beneath them. Their role was primarily diagnostic, focusing on the humoral theory, prescribing remedies, and prognosticating. It was the barber surgeon who got his hands dirty, literally. This unique division of labor meant that the person performing the most invasive procedures was often less educated in medical theory, but perhaps more practiced in the physical act of cutting. Let's say you have that infected abscess. The barber surgeon would examine it, probably without washing his hands. He might prod at it, causing a fresh wave of agony. His solution would be to incise and drain it. He'd take a sharp knife or lancet and, with a quick, painful cut, slice open the swollen flesh. You'd feel the sudden searing pain, and then the warm gush of pus, mixed with blood, spilling from the wound. There would be no local anesthetic, no numbing cream. You'd just have to grit your teeth and bear it. The relief of the pressure might be immediate, but the risk of infection was astronomical. Given the unhygienic conditions and instruments, this is where a minor infection could quickly escalate into a life-threatening one. Or perhaps it's a tooth. Toothaches were rampant in the Middle Ages due to poor diet and lack of hygiene. Your barber surgeon would approach with a pair of fearsome-looking pliers or forceps, likely designed more for gripping than for delicate extraction. He'd grab the offending tooth, and with a wrenching, twisting motion, attempt to pull it out. You'd feel the agonizing pressure, the tearing of roots, the splintering of bone, and then a sickening pop as the tooth finally came free. The pain would be immense, and the bleeding could be profuse. Again, no anesthesia, just raw, brutal force. The risk of breaking the jaw, leaving fragments of tooth, or introducing infection into the open socket was very high. The daily routine of a barber surgeon highlights this disturbing blend of roles. One moment, he might be carefully trimming a noble's beard. The next, he could be performing a crude amputation in the back room, then returning to his chair to give a peasant a quick shave. The smell of blood, the sounds of suffering, would be just part of the background noise in his shop. It's a chilling reminder of how different the concept of healthcare was. There's an ongoing academic debate among historians about the true status of barber surgeons. Were they respected practitioners in their own right, or merely skilled tradesmen looked down upon by university physicians? The answer, like much of medieval life, is complex and varies by region and time period. You, as the medieval patient, would have no choice but to trust this man. He was likely the most accessible, and often the only, practitioner equipped with the tools and the willingness to perform manual operations. Your life literally depended on his steady hand and whatever rudimentary knowledge he possessed. And the success of your recovery would depend less on his skill and more on your body's immune system fighting off the inevitable onslaught of bacteria. So, the next time you visit a clean, modern dentist or surgeon, take a moment to appreciate the centuries of medical progress that separate us from the age of the barber surgeon. Because back then, the friendly neighborhood barber might have been the last person you ever saw. His final service to you, not a trim, but a truly disturbing and often fatal medical procedure. You'd hope for a quick cut, but often, you'd get a lot more than you bargained for. You've somehow, against all odds, managed to navigate the perilous world of medieval medicine and its terrifying practitioners. Perhaps you even survived a visit to the barber surgeon. Now, your medieval healer, having exhausted the more overtly violent methods, turns to something that sounds far more benign, yet was often just as ineffective, and sometimes even dangerous herbal remedies. This is the world of potions and poultices, a strange blend of genuine plant knowledge, superstition, and wishful thinking, where a walk in the woods could yield both medicine and poison. Imagine you're suffering from a persistent cough, perhaps even a fever, or a festering skin ailment that the barber surgeon decided not to cut open. Your healer, whether a local village wise woman, a monastery apothecary, or even the same physician who wanted to bleed you, might now prescribe a concoction of herbs. This era relied heavily on the natural world. As chemical pharmaceuticals were centuries away, plants were believed to hold inherent powers, not just to heal, but sometimes to harm, to influence the humors, or even to ward off evil. The creation of these remedies was often a meticulous, almost ritualistic process. Herbs would be gathered at specific times of the day or lunar cycle. sometimes with prayers or incantations whispered over them. They might be dried, ground into powders, boiled into infusions, steeped into decoctions, or mixed into salves and poultices. The smell of these preparations would vary wildly: the earthy scent of dried roots, the sharp aroma of mint or rosemary, the cloying sweetness of some blossoms, or the acrid tang of less pleasant concoctions. For a cough, you might be given a tea brewed from coltsfoot or marshmallow root, known for their soothing properties. For a fever, perhaps a decoction of willow bark, which contains salicin, a precursor to aspirin, a genuine, though accidental, early form of pain relief. For wounds, you might have a poultice applied, a paste made from mashed plantain leaves or comfrey, believed to aid healing and reduce swelling. Some of these remedies, through sheer trial and error over centuries, did possess genuine, albeit mild, medicinal properties. This common historical fact of effective plant-based medicines predates modern pharmacology, often discovered through empirical observation. However, the efficacy of these remedies was often dwarfed by a profound lack of understanding of dosage, active compounds, and toxicology. Many potent herbs are also highly poisonous if prepared incorrectly or taken in too large a quantity. You might be given a remedy for insomnia made with belladonna deadly nightshade, which in small doses acts as a sedative, but in slightly larger doses causes delirium, hallucinations, and ultimately death. Or perhaps a purgative concoction containing foxglove, a plant with powerful cardiac glycosides that, while now used to treat heart failure, in medieval times could easily cause fatal arrhythmias. The line between medicine and poison was incredibly fine, and often crossed inadvertently. Consider the complexity of diagnosis. The humoral theory, as we discussed, often led to misinterpretations of symptoms. So, a remedy given for an assumed humoral imbalance might be completely inappropriate for the underlying true illness. You might have a serious internal infection, but your healer, believing it to be an excess of black bile, gives you a purgative herbal concoction that simply dehydrates you further and delays proper care. The cure for something like appendicitis might involve strong laxatives or poultices to the abdomen, all of which would exacerbate the condition and lead to a painful, lingering death from peritonitis. Beyond simple toxicity, the preparation and storage of these remedies were often unhygienic. Herbal infusions could quickly become breeding grounds for bacteria. Poultices, applied to open wounds, might introduce more pathogens than they healed, leading to rampant infection. Imagine a seemingly harmless herbal paste applied to a cut, only for the wound to fester and turn gangrenous, spreading infection throughout your body, all because of invisible contaminants. Furthermore, many herbal remedies were less about physiological effect and more about symbolic or magical thinking. The doctrine of signatures, for instance, was a widespread belief that plants resembling certain body parts or ailments could cure them. Walnuts, resembling the brain, were thought to be good for the head. Liverwort, with its liver-shaped leaves, was used for liver ailments. While charming in concept, this often led to medically useless remedies being prescribed based on appearance rather than actual efficacy. Historians still debate the true extent to which the doctrine of signatures influenced practical herbalism versus being a philosophical overlay. Then there's the element of outright quackery and exploitation. Not all herbalists were genuinely trying to help. Some were charlatans, peddling inert or even harmful concoctions for profit, preying on the desperation of the sick. You might spend your last coins on a miracle cure that does nothing but hasten your demise, or leave you poorer and sicker. So, while the idea of a gentle, natural cure sounds appealing, the reality of medieval herbal medicine was often fraught with peril. You were at the mercy of imperfect knowledge, often dangerous ingredients, and rudimentary preparation. The gentle caress of nature could easily turn into a toxic embrace, or simply offer no relief at all, allowing your underlying illness to worsen unchecked. You'd drink the foul-tasting brew, hoping for a miracle. But often, all you'd get was a prolonged illness, or worse, a new, unforeseen torment added to your existing suffering, all delivered with the best of intentions and the darkest of outcomes. It truly makes you appreciate the standardized dosages and safety regulations of modern pharmaceuticals, doesn't it? You've navigated the tricky waters of medieval medical beliefs, from the disturbing practices of bloodletting and purging to the terrifying prospect of a hole in your skull. You've even sampled the hit-or-miss world of herbal remedies. But now, your medieval healer introduces you to a diagnostic tool that is both incredibly simple and, to modern sensibilities, utterly revolting urine diagnostics. This wasn't just a quick dipstick test. It was a comprehensive, multi-sensory examination of your bodily fluids, often leading to diagnoses that were as bizarre as they were inaccurate. Imagine you're feeling unwell again, perhaps a persistent fever, or some vague internal discomfort. Your physician, or a skilled apothecary, won't ask you to stick out your tongue and say, "Ah." Instead, the first, and often most important, step in his diagnostic process will be to request a sample of your urine. This isn't just for a quick glance. It's for a full, detailed inspection, usually performed in a specially designed flask called a matula, shaped like a bladder. The sight of it, clear or cloudy, would be the initial clue. The examination would begin with a thorough visual inspection. Your physician would hold the matula up to the light, perhaps by a window or a flickering candle, meticulously observing every aspect of its appearance. The color was paramount. Is it pale, indicating an excess of phlegm? Is it dark yellow, suggesting an imbalance of yellow bile, or perhaps a reddish hue, hinting at too much blood? Greenish urine might suggest a liver problem, while black urine was considered a grave sign, often indicating an excess of black bile and a near-certain death sentence. The shade and clarity were analyzed with intense scrutiny, often with accompanying detailed charts that mapped specific colors to various ailments. But the visual inspection didn't stop at color. The physician would also observe its consistency and sediment. Is it thick or thin? Cloudy or clear? Are there any particles floating within it? What about the sediment at the bottom? Is it red, white, sandy? The texture of the sediment, its shape, and its color were all believed to reveal intricate details about the state of your internal organs and the balance of your humors. They might even try to distinguish between a healthy sediment and a sick one, often making highly subjective judgments. Next, and prepare yourself for this, would come the smell. Yes, your medieval doctor would literally sniff your urine. The odor was considered a crucial diagnostic indicator. A sharp, pungent smell might indicate fever or excess heat. A sweet smell could suggest an internal rotting or an imbalance of the humors related to decay, though it was, unknowingly, often a sign of diabetes. A foul smell was, predictably, a bad sign, suggesting corruption within the body. Imagine holding a flask of your own warm urine to your nose, while your physician takes a long, contemplative sniff. It's a truly intimate, and frankly disturbing, moment of medieval medicine. And then, for the truly dedicated physician, might come the taste. Yes, they would sometimes actually taste your urine. A sweet taste, again, could point to certain internal imbalances, or, unknowingly, diabetes. A salty taste might indicate other humoral issues. While not every physician routinely tasted urine, it was a recognized, if perhaps less frequently practiced, part of their diagnostic toolkit. The idea of this being a normal professional medical practice highlights the incredible gulf between medieval and modern understanding of hygiene and pathology. This less commonly known historical detail underscores the extent to which medieval practitioners relied on direct sensory experience. The urine analysis didn't stop there. Some practitioners would even predict the course of your disease based on how the urine changed over time. They might ask for multiple samples over several days, observing how the color deepened or how the sediment altered. They might even consult astrological charts, believing that the position of the stars and planets influenced the humors and thus the appearance of your urine. The entire practice, known as uroscopy, was considered a highly skilled art, passed down through generations. The obvious problem with this elaborate system was its inherent unreliability and the profound lack of scientific basis. While some changes in urine can indicate medical conditions, e.g., blood in urine for kidney issues, or sweetness for diabetes, medieval physicians rarely, if ever, correctly interpreted these signs. They were fitting observations into a flawed theoretical framework. A change in diet, fluid intake, or even the type of container used to collect the sample could drastically alter its appearance, leading to wildly inaccurate diagnoses and, consequently, inappropriate and harmful treatments. Historians still debate the true diagnostic value of uroscopy. While it provided a sense of scientific rigor for the medieval mind, it often led to dangerous misinterpretations. For instance, a patient might be perfectly healthy, but a slightly cloudy urine sample could lead to aggressive bloodletting or purging, simply because the physician believed a humor was out of balance. Conversely, a patient with a serious, life-threatening condition might have relatively normal-looking urine, leading the physician to dismiss the severity of the illness. So, while modern medicine uses sophisticated lab tests to analyze your blood and urine for tiny biochemical markers, your medieval doctor was using his eyes, nose, and sometimes his tongue to glean meaning from a single bodily fluid. It was a golden glance, perhaps, but one that more often led to bizarre, dangerous, and utterly ineffective interventions than to any true healing. You'd leave the examination not with a sense of relief, but with a lingering sense of unease, wondering what bizarre interpretation of your bodily fluids would lead to your next terrifying cure. It truly makes you appreciate the privacy and precision of a modern lab test, doesn't it? You've somehow survived the internal assaults of bloodletting and violent purges, the terrifying prospect of trepanation, and the disturbing scrutiny of urine diagnostics. You've even braved the barber surgeon's crude tools and the hit-or-miss world of herbal remedies. But now, a new terror sweeps through the land, a shadow that falls over every city, every village, every home. This is the era of the great pestilences, the terrifying epidemics that decimated populations, and the rise of a chilling figure, the plague doctor. These masked terrors, with their strange bird-like visages, were often as terrifying as the disease itself. Their remedies often useless, and their presence a grim herald of impending doom. Imagine the year 1348, or perhaps a later outbreak in the 17th century. A mysterious illness descends upon your town. People fall sick suddenly, developing painful swellings in their armpits, groins, and necks, the infamous buboes. Their skin turns black. They suffer from agonizing fevers, delirium, and often die within days, sometimes even hours. This is the Black Death, or a later iteration of the plague, a terrifying, seemingly unstoppable force that defies all understanding. Panic grips the populace. The streets, once bustling, become eerily quiet, save for the occasional mournful cries or the ominous ringing of bells announcing another death. In this atmosphere of profound fear and desperation, a strange figure emerges. He is dressed in a heavy, ankle-length overcoat, often made of waxed leather or thick fabric, designed to be impermeable to the miasma, the bad air believed to carry the disease. On his head, he wears a wide-brimmed hat, signifying his profession. But it's his face that truly strikes terror, a grotesque, bird-like mask with large, glass-covered eye holes and a long, curving beak. This iconic mask, though more common in later plague outbreaks than the Black Death itself, is a chilling symbol of despair. The beak itself would be stuffed with aromatic herbs, spices, and dried flowers, lavender, mint, myrrh, believed to filter the poisonous air and protect the wearer from contagion. While a common historical image, Historians still debate the true prevalence of this specific full costume during the earlier medieval plagues. This is your plague doctor. He walks through the silent streets, his presence alone a sign that death is near. His job is not to cure, not really. His primary function is to count the dead, to document the spread of the disease, and sometimes to offer what rudimentary care he can, usually to the poor and unmourned. As wealthier families often fled the cities or quarantined themselves, his remedies are rooted in the same flawed humoral theory we've discussed, but amplified by the desperation of a pandemic. For the plague, bloodletting would be performed with even greater ferocity, often multiple times a day, to draw out the corrupt blood. The buboes, the painful swellings, would be lanced, cut open with a knife, and the putrid pus drained, often with no concern for cleanliness. Imagine the additional agony of such a procedure, performed by a masked figure, the knife plunging into your inflamed lymph nodes, the pus oozing out, all done without pain relief. The hope was that by releasing the poison, the patient might recover. But in reality, it simply provided another entry point for secondary infections. Other remedies were equally bizarre and ineffective. You might be told to rub various substances on your buboes: dried toad, pigeon entrails, arsenic, or even human excrement. The logic was often based on sympathetic magic or the idea of drawing out the disease. Imagine the vile smell, the sticky, sickening sensation of these grotesque applications, all while your body battles the terrifying fever of the plague. Or you might be instructed to carry bouquets of strong-smelling herbs, to sniff vinegar, or to burn aromatic woods. All attempts to purify the miasma believed to be responsible for the plague. The plague doctor might also carry a long wooden stick. This wasn't just for dramatic effect. It allowed him to examine patients, prod at their buboes, or move infected garments without direct contact. A primitive form of social distancing driven by fear rather than germ theory. He would also use it to point out corpses to his assistants, or to indicate a house to be sealed. The high mortality rate of the plague meant that the plague doctor rarely saw a patient recover. His very presence became synonymous with death. He was a terrifying, almost supernatural figure, moving silently through a world gripped by terror. His beak-like mask a symbol of the pervasive, inescapable doom. The psychological impact of seeing such a figure approach your home, knowing what he represented, must have been immense. It drained any lingering hope, replacing it with cold, hard despair. Historians still debate the true effectiveness of any medieval plague remedies. While some individual cases might have seen a recovery likely due to natural immunity rather than treatment, the overall impact of medieval medicine on the course of the Black Death and subsequent outbreaks was negligible. The plague continued its devastating course, largely unchecked by the desperate and often horrifying interventions of the masked doctors. The sheer scale of death from the plague, for instance, often cited as wiping out a third to half of Europe's population in the 14th century, highlights the utter powerlessness of their medical practices. So, while the image of the plague doctor is iconic and somewhat romanticized in modern culture, for you, the medieval patient, he was a harbinger of agony and a symbol of futility. His strange appearance, his gruesome remedies, and the almost certain outcome of death made him one of the most disturbing figures in medieval medical history. You would stare into those glass eyes, seeing not hope, but the reflection of your own imminent, terrifying end. You've bravely journeyed through the unsettling landscape of medieval medical practices, from the scientific by their standards to the outright terrifying. You've seen the misguided theories, the painful procedures, and the grim realities of disease. But beyond the lances and leeches, beyond the strange concoctions and the masked doctors, lay an even deeper layer of medieval healing, the realm of supernatural cures. This was a world where faith, folklore, and outright magic intertwined with medicine, offering a desperate hope when all else failed. or when earthly understanding simply couldn't grasp the true nature of affliction. Imagine you or a loved one is suffering from a mysterious illness. Perhaps it's a chronic ailment, a wasting sickness that defies all the barber surgeon's cuts and the physician's purgatives. Or maybe it's something clearly beyond their understanding. Fits, strange visions, unexplained paralysis. In such cases, the medieval mind often turned to the divine or the arcane. Illness wasn't always seen as a simple humoral imbalance. It could be a punishment from God, the work of demons, or the result of a malicious spell cast by a witch. And if the cause was supernatural, then the cure, too, had to be supernatural. One of the most common approaches was through religious intervention. You would seek out a saint's relic, perhaps a bone fragment, a piece of cloth, or even a drop of holy oil, believed to possess miraculous healing powers. Pilgrimages to holy sites, like the shrine of St. Thomas Becket at Canterbury or the tomb of St. James at Compostela, were common. Imagine the arduous journey, often undertaken while already gravely ill, enduring the discomfort and danger of travel, all for the slim hope of a divine cure. You'd approach the shrine, pray fervently, perhaps touch the relic, hoping for a miracle, a spontaneous remission that would be attributed solely to divine grace. This wasn't just a desperate act. For many, it was the ultimate expression of faith and the last beacon of hope. A common historical fact is that pilgrimage sites often doubled as de facto hospitals, with rudimentary care provided by monastic orders. Beyond relics, there were blessings and exorcisms, if an illness was believed to be demonic possession or caused by evil spirits. A priest might perform an exorcism, chanting prayers, sprinkling holy water, and making the sign of the cross, all to drive out the malevolent entity. Imagine the terrifying spectacle: the priest's fervent incantations, the desperate struggles of the afflicted, the palpable fear in the air. While largely ineffective against physical ailments, the psychological impact on both the patient and onlookers could be profound, sometimes inducing a placebo effect, or at least a sense of having done something. Then there was the realm of folk magic and charms. These were often practiced by village wise women or cunning folk, individuals who straddled the line between accepted healer and suspected sorcerer. You might wear an amulet made from a specific stone or animal bone, believed to ward off disease, or perhaps you'd carry a handwritten charm with a prayer or a magical symbol. Imagine wearing a bag of dried herbs around your neck, or a piece of parchment with strange symbols, hoping it would protect you from the unseen forces of illness. Some charms involved specific rituals, walking around a church 3 times backward, or drinking water from a particular spring at dawn. The belief was that the charm or ritual would influence fate, redirect negative energies, or simply offer a spiritual shield. One particularly bizarre practice was the use of touching for diseases like scrofula, a form of tuberculosis of the lymph nodes. In England and France, it was believed that the monarch possessed a divine gift to cure this condition by touch. You would join a long queue of sufferers, waiting for the king or queen to lay their hand upon you, believing that their royal touch, granted by God, could heal your affliction. Imagine the anticipation, the sheer hope, as you stood before your sovereign, clinging to the belief that a single touch could save you, while obviously having no medical basis. The psychological power of such an encounter for a desperate believer cannot be underestimated. Historians still debate the socio-political significance of the royal touch, noting its role in reinforcing monarchical power and divine right. The use of animal parts and bizarre concoctions also frequently blurred the line between herbal remedy and outright magic. A dried wolf's liver for stomach ailments, a necklace of mole's feet for toothaches, or drinking a potion containing powdered mummy for various ills. These weren't just about active compounds. They were imbued with symbolic power, the essence of the animal or the ancient dead believed to transfer curative properties, Imagine the taste and texture of such a remedy. A truly disturbing experience. The psychological comfort offered by these supernatural cures was often their most potent effect. In a world with little scientific understanding, fear of illness was immense. These practices, whether through prayer, ritual, or charm, provided a sense of agency, a feeling that one was actively fighting back against the unknown forces of disease. They offered hope, even if false, in the face of suffering that earthly medicine often couldn't alleviate. However, the dark side of this reliance on the supernatural was the potential for neglecting practical, albeit limited, medieval medical care. If you believed your illness was due to a curse, you might ignore a wound that needed dressing, or a fever that needed cooling. This could lead to a preventable death, simply because the focus was on spiritual cleansing rather than physical healing. The academic argument often explored is whether the dominance of supernatural explanations hindered the development of empirical medical practices. So, while modern medicine focuses on scientific diagnosis and evidence-based treatments, your medieval self would also navigate a world where illness was a battle against unseen forces. You would cling to relics, whisper charms, and seek the touch of kings, all in a desperate attempt to find healing in a world where the line between natural and supernatural was often invisible. It's a chilling reminder that when human knowledge failed, people turned to faith and folklore, making the medieval approach to illness a truly complex, often disturbing, and sometimes tragically ineffective blend of science and magic.